But the UN General Assembly was being held in 1960, and Fidel was heads of states from all over the globe were attending this important UN General Assembly. And so when Fidel's delegation arrived in New York, there was a hotel called the Hotel, you have the Teresa, the Shelburne Hotel, which is in proximity to the Cuban mission at the United Nations. And when in my discussion and in my interviews with Raul Roa Khoury, who was a young Cuban diplomat, he told me that they were ill treated to begin with when they walked into the Shelburne Hotel with their fatigues on, and it was a multiracial delegation. Juan Almeida, who's a black general, Cuban general, they all walked into the hotel, and they were looked at as hoodlums, quote unquote. And then the hotel manager told them that they would have to deposit more than $20,000 to stay in the hotel. And so Fidel said, no, we ain't doing that. Yeah, no way. Okay, we are not going to do that. It's exorbitant. It's outrageous. So Fidel said, okay, what we're going to do is we are going to set up tents on the grounds of the United Nations. That's where we're going to stay, because we're not staying in this hotel. Okay. So, of course, the UN was, the authorities there and the Secret Service, they're like, okay, what are we going to do? So one of the actually, he was still an ambassador, but still being assigned as a Cuban ambassador under the Batista regime, because they had not transferred the total government at that point. And so the old ambassador said, well, look, I'll find another hotel. So he's talking about the Waldorf Astoria we can stay there. And so Fidel says, no, we're not staying there. So there was an organization called Fair Play for Cuba. And this organization was in the forefront of having solidarity with Cuba. And also there's a journalist whose last name was Matthews, who had actually interviewed the rebel, quote unquote, rebel army in the Sierra Maestas, and had interviewed Fidel in the July 26th movement, which is what it was called. And it was very important for his information to get out in the New York Times. And that was some of the first ways in which people in this country learned about the importance of the Cuban Revolution and prior to why there was this Cuban Revolution and who was involved in this revolution. So along with Matthews and the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and the young diplomat, and he's very important, and by the way, he's still alive, Raul Roa Khoury, said that he said to members of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, well, look, we really need to try to find some place for this delegation. We can't stay on the grounds of the UN. And so Malcolm X had El Haj Malik Shabazz, he presented. He was a part of a community organization, a Harlem community-based organization that was responsible for kind of keeping things cooled out in the neighborhood, and also around the time of the UN, UN Africans and what have you, they were all going to be coming to Harlem. Malcolm heard about the situation of the Cuban delegation. And so he, along with the committee Malcolm was in the forefront of this, invited Fidel and the delegation to come up to Harlem. But before that could happen, other negotiations had to take place, because the Hotel Teresa was owned by a brother named Mr. Love B. Woods. I raised up his name today. Love B. Woods owned the hotel. And so negotiations had to take place of having this delegation come to Harlem. Who's going to pay for it? This is a time of enormity. It's like you can't just have this group come in here and for free. So in one of my interviews with an attorney who is, and we'll talk more about his name, a brother told me that they had to find the money to get him to get the delegation to Harlem. So Bumpy Johnson, who's a well-known figure, a well-known character in our history, Bumpy was a big-time numbers dealer, and it's not lore, but Bumpy put the money up. He backed he backed the delegation stay in the Hotel Teresa. This is in the book, and the story is very clear from quote unquote the horse's mouth. So the Harlem delegation packed up, and the 19th, 10 days, they just moved on out of there, on from downtown Manhattan, and they moved on up to Harlem. And so, of course, arriving, Malcolm was the host. And that night, in one of the narratives in the book, Sarah Wright, who was a member of the Harlem Writers Guild, a very known another one of our very well-known authors, she writes that it was thousands of people were out front that night. The Nation of Islam had organized the security because Malcolm had not. He was still in the nation at the time, and then there was all the leftists and the coloration of the colorism of the folk outside is just amazing. Dominicans, Black Panamanians, because there was a large Panamanian community in Harlem. Everybody was there. So around midnight, Malcolm goes up to the room, and he's greeted by Fidel. And the picture that's up now, that's Mr. Love B. Woods on the right-hand side. He paid a big price for doing what he did. At some point, we could talk about that. You may want to note that, Joyce. Talking about COINTELPRO. He was a victim of COINTELPRO before we even started talking about COINTELPRO and Black political prisoners. So that's what happened. The meeting was short. And in my interview with Ronaldo Pinaver, who was one of the Black Cuban journalists that accompanied the delegation, he told me that it was pleasant. They chatted, and there's in the book, there's actually a small summary of what they actually talked about. I won't tell anybody here, but what they actually talked about. You got to tease people to stay online, in programs like this. And you want to make sure that people purchase the book and read it. Yeah. Yes, because we don't want to tell the whole story. But that's kind of like how it happened. I hope that, I know I went a roundabout way, but I'm always conscious that I sat in you all's shoes, and you don't want your interviewer to like take off and go someplace that you can't bring them back in control. So I'm going to kind of stop there.
This is awesome because you dropped so many nuggets just in that little piece. And I want to point out, because again, this is the importance when we talk about guerrilla intellectuals, right? This is the importance because you look at someone like Malcolm, who had a connection to the streets. And many folks don't know, you mentioned Bumpy Johnson. When Malcolm left the nation, Bumpy offered to give him 200 men for backup, for security. And Malcolm said no, because he didn't want things to go in the wrong direction. So, it could have, had Malcolm not been so sharp, there could have been a serious war, and it could have been serious bloodshed. So I just wanted to add that, since you mentioned Bumpy. But
that's good information. Thank you.
Yeah.